Welcome, everybody. We're going to be working now on our exercise for this unit. But before we do that, what I want to do is kind of like reinforce this concept that we have already been using functions for a while here in MySQL. And I'm going to give you three like really basic examples that might kind of trigger your memory a little bit, right? So here's an example, and this is kind of like a generic little breakdown here where we have a possible exercise where you're counting the rows in the table. And I don't know if you guys recall us doing that way back in the beginning. But they have, say, given a table with a ID, a name, a department, and a salary, write a query to count the total number of employees in the table. And so if you remember this little command here, the count function, notice the parentheses that follow. And then, of course, the asterisk in this syntax represents a wildcard, meaning everything. We want everything from this column, from this table, right? And it's going to count it for us. So this is the count function. If you guys recall, that is something that we've done before. So that's a function we've used before. Another one that we've used before is the average function. So notice that down here in the code. And these are, sample database, columns and stuff, right? So for example, if we have some sort of a query where we're looking to see the department and the average salary of that department, we can basically take the data from that column and run the average function on it. And when it's returning the information, it totals all the values, divides by the number it counted, and then gives us that average amount as a result, right? That is an example of a function. They do make a little bit of a note here that group by is technically a function also, but we don't use parentheses after it. So they're calling it a function as well. And I used to think of it in that capacity too. So this one is one that doesn't use parentheses, in other words. My last example is one where we're looking at a formatting command, and we're going to play with this date format command here in just a little bit. But notice how we're extracting an order ID, order date, and customer ID, and that when the date format comes out of the database, we want it to be displayed as month, day, and year. And I want you to look really carefully at the characters here, right? So we have these percent signs, right? Which means, well, we use as many characters as are necessary, is what that is, right? So for example, and then the other piece of it is, notice that some letters are capitals and some capital or some are lowercase. And then there's also inserted inside here the space and the comma, and that's all declared in the formatting. So we're taking the order date, and if you remember how the stuff gets stored in the database, it goes year dash month dash day and then the time. That's how stuff gets stored. But if we want to format the date in the way that looks useful to us as regular humans, right, this might be a little bit more readable, and this formatting would allow us to achieve that. And especially in written output, that might be a lot more useful than the cryptic other format, right? A lot of people are not used to seeing it in that format. And think of the way we normally write dates. It's month, day, year, right? And then the Europeans flip the day and the month, and they do day, month, year, and that all of those are backwards from how it sits in the database anyhow, right? So that one can be pretty important, and American and European concerns are often different. Americans are the oddballs with it, by the way, folks. The rest of the world kind of follows a different format if you're not aware of that. So when you go to Europe and somebody says, hey, meet me on 11/11, well, that one's an easy one. But if they said, meet me on 1/7, is that July or is that January? In Europe, that would be the 1st of January, right? Here, or excuse me, the 1st of July. Here it would be the 7th of January, which is as the example. All right, let's switch over to the actual exercises here within the unit. And that is kind of detailed as a list of instructions here. We are using the My Guitar Shop MySQL database. So these are the queries that we're writing. We're going to go through each one of these one at a time and build them. But let's get MySQL up and running and then connected to your local instance of the database. Right, so I'm connected up here. And you can see I have all my work open from last time, and I probably should close the unnecessary tabs here. And I'm also going to close the SQL file, and I am going to save it because I forgot to save it last time. And that was Unit 7, Chapter 8. Is what that one was. All right. So I do have the Guitar Shop loaded up here. If you don't, you'll want to make sure that you're attached. I'm going to create a new SQL file. I'm going to zoom in significantly, and I'm just going to do a use command for use my guitar shop, not ship, but shop, semicolon, and let's execute that query, and we are now attached to that database. All right. All right, so now I'm going to go back and start grabbing the commands here. So the first command, all right, I just wanted to copy it, but all right, thank you, Brightspace. Can't remember, how do we do a comment in here, right? And of course, it brings all the spaces with it. All right, Control Z that. Right, I don't know if you guys caught that. It's bringing all the HTML code with it. All right, I'm going to do a little sanitization here, and I didn't mean to click on VLC, but I did, so I got to close it. But I am going to open up my Notepad++ here, which is always my handy little switchblade text editor is what I call it, like the Swiss Army knife of text editors, because it's very easy to like drop in text and manipulate it. So I'm just using this to get rid of that goofy HTML stuff here. And then I'm going to move this back over here, right? And let's put in some carriage returns and put pound signs in front of each one of these. I just want to make it so our instructions are on the screen. And really, we should probably number this. We should probably say exercise 1 or something like that. All right, so this is our plan. So create a query that calculates the average list price for each item in the product table. Make sure to format the price as shown, and you will use the average, format, and concat functions. Now, in all fairness, are you guys seeing how it's shown? And so now I have the concern that you're not. So I'm going to pause the recording. All right. So thank you for pointing out the fact that I was talking and talking and talking and not recording. So I am going to repeat a little bit of what I just said here. Our goal for this next exercise, which is exercise number 3, is to create a query that displays the list price, discount percent, discount amount calculated using the round function and the net sales price. You'll be using concat, round, and format functions to basically create this output. This information is coming from our products table, which we have here on the screen, right? And we're basically just given these 2 columns, right, with the list price and discount percent. This will need to be formatted so it looks like money. We've kind of already done that here tonight. So we'll make sure that we $signs, commas, and probably 2 decimal places. Discount percent will need to be put on the screen with a percent sign following it, but no trailing digits after the decimal point. There's none of them here that have any, right? Anyhow, right? So that won't need to be there. Then we'll need to do a calculation, which is going to take that discount and put it here. And then this column will subtract the discount from the list price and give us the actual price that people are paying, right? And so there's a lot of rounding and formatting that happens in this, especially if you're trying to get it matched up. I am noticing on this output, and I don't know if you guys are picking this up, None of the dollar amounts have commas on 4-digit numbers. You guys picking up on that? Yeah, so none of them do, right? So we won't use the format command in that particular capacity. We'll use it in a different capacity. All right, so let's go ahead and start coding this and see what we can come up with. So coming back up here, I am going to take the exercise description here and drop it in because I do think that's helpful if I can find it. There we go. And then, of course, we will pretty that up a little bit. Let's get some comment marks in there. And then we'll put in some strategic carriage returns here to get it all on the screen. Right, so there's our impetus here. And I'm going to begin by typing in select because I know I'm going to go there. Now I got to start thinking. I want to display in this order the list price and the discount, but I want them both to look nice. So let's start with list price. We'll just go one at a time, right? And I'm going to use this format where I do the indenting because I'm going to have to create 4 columns, right? So it'll be easier to see if I do it here. Now we've already worked with taking a dollar sign and adding it to a dollar amount. And because the list price in the table is already in a dollar and cents format with 2 decimal places, I don't really need to format it to do that. I just need to get that dollar sign in front there. So I'm just going to do a concat on that one. So I'm going to concatenate that onto it. So we'll do concat parentheses, right? I'm going to do a dollar sign. Oops, single quote there. Comma, and then what are we adding that to? We're putting that on list price. So we're just taking that as it is. And then how are they labeling it in the document? List price with no spaces. So that I can match pretty easily. So I'll say as list price, capital L, capital P. There's my comma for going to the next line here. Now we need to do the discount percent. Let's take a look at that really quick again. Just needs to be the whole number amount with the percent sign after. So once again, we're going to concat, right? So let's just kind of build the concat thing first this time. What are we concatenating? Well, we're going to take basically the discount percent, correct? And we're going to concatenate to it, in essence, the percent sign. Okay, so that's actually a pretty simplistic maneuver. But if I do it like this, it will show the decimal point in the 2 useless characters after because none of them have any values in them. So we're going to take the discount percent then and we're going to format that. So I'm going to add format to the discount percent. And what are we going to do? Well, we're going to feed in the format percent and we're going to truncate everything after the decimal point. So we just put in a 0. So that will lose the dot and the 2 numbers. All right. Let's output that as, and what do they want us to do? Just discount is what they want to call it. So discount, right? And there's another comma. All right. Now, you know what? I'm ready to just try this right now just to make sure it's working correctly. So let's do that. And I know we have a couple more columns to add where the math happens, but for me, it's always kind of helpful if we can at least test what we have so far. And I notice I removed the comma right up here as I did that, right? Because if I leave the comma in, it gives me a problem, right? So we want to remove that. And then I'm just going to go ahead and execute this. So here comes the execution. All right. Dollar amounts look okay. And the discount percent looks okay. right? Notice how it's nice round numbers. All right, so we want to add to that now a couple more columns, and we can kind of build this any way we can imagine, but here, this is going to take a little bit more thinking because now we have to calculate the discount amount. And so we're going to have to multiply the discount percent against the list price. All right, that kind of makes sense. But if we're actually going to come up with this value, and this is where the kind of the mathematical stretch comes in a little bit, and I'll have you think about this. I can just take this value as it is, but if I multiply it against 30, and so let me just give you my example here. I'll just pull up my calculator. If I go 699 times 30, that's 10 times bigger than what this number is, right? So I really need to make this 10 times smaller, which I can do by multiplying by 0.01, right? And then it scales correctly. So I got to include that 0.01 in my calculation is kind of my point. All right. I'm also going to be concatenating a dollar sign to the front of it and rounding to 2 decimal places. So I want you guys to kind of follow my whole stream here on this one. A little bit more complicated, right? All right, so here goes. I'm going to start with the math first, and then I'm going to wrap the functions around it. That's how my brain works, rather than thinking from the other direction in, right? So here comes the math. I'm going to take the list price, and I'm using the names of the columns as they are in the table now, right? And I need to multiply that against the discount percent, right? But we already discovered that scales to be 10 times larger than we need it to be because of how the percents are put in the database. So then we need to multiply that by 0.01 to take 10% of it to make it correct. So I think maybe the better fix would be to have discount percent as a decimal, but that's just kind of me. But we can adjust that, right? All right, so that's the math, right? Now I'm going to wrap a set of parentheses around this because I know that this needs to be rounded, right? Because when we're doing percentages, we don't know what's going to happen after the decimal place. So we're going to round this calculation. This whole calculation is one term in the parameter list. We're going to add a comma at the end, and we're going to round it to 2 decimal places. Okay. Then we want to take whatever that generates and we want to concatenate to it the dollar sign. So we're going to go back to our concat command. So here's concat, parens, one at the beginning, one at the end. What are we concatenating onto this? Well, a dollar sign. So here comes single quote, dollar sign, single quote, and a comma. So we're going to join a dollar sign to whatever this calculation and rounding is, right? And then, well, when we put it on the screen, we're going to alias it as, and I'm looking what we're supposed to call it, discount amount, capital D, capital A, right? Capital D, capital A. Oops. So we're going to say here as discount amount. All right. I think we should test it, right? And this is kind of how I operate because this is kind of a complicated statement rather than go to the next statement and then try to figure out which of the two is right or wrong. Let's get this to work. If we get this to work, the next one won't be so bad. I don't think, right? All right, so let's go ahead and run this. And if we look at these prices, right, and of course we have a comparison here, right, because this has the correct values in it. Are we getting the same values here? Yeah, we sure are, right? All the dollar amounts that are the same are coming up with the same discounts exactly. Now our next task is to match up the net price, right? So far, so good. Everybody is doing okay on this? Yeah, and Brent, I'm seeing the little thing that you said in there. Divide the discount by 100, then multiply by the discount amount. Yeah, you can do that too. But multiplying by 0.01 is effectively the same as dividing by 100, right? You're just using the decimal point to do it. That's the cleverness of base 10 math, by the way. All right, moving on. Understood. Right. You already wrote the code. And you know what, Brent? If you get the code to work using division, the same difference, right? I mean, really, it comes out to the same exact value. It doesn't really alter it in any way. All right, let's work on the net price piece and let's figure out the maneuvers on that one also. So we already figured out how to get this. So we multiplied those together, multiplied it by 0.01 or divide by 100. Either way, same difference. And we get this value. Now we need to take this value, subtract it from this one, and format it so it looks like this one. Okay, here's the problem though, right? If we were doing this, let's say, and I'll use Python as the example because of the number of you that are also in the Python section that follows, that normally if we were doing this in a programming language, we would take whatever value this generated, right? And we would store it in a variable, and then we would just call the variable to do the math, right? We can't do that here though, right? Because this calculation that I've highlighted is not stored. It's an on-the-fly calculation for output. So I'm going to have to repeat this calculation and subtract that from the list price. You see like the secret sauce there, right? So I like talked it all the way through. So I'm going to put the round command in there. I'm going to take all of that. I'm going to say list price minus the round is our amount. That's how we get to the math. That in and of itself needs to be also, well, you know, and I'm flubbing this a little bit because that round command still requires the 2 here, by the way. So sorry about that. But all of this now has to be concatenated to a $sign also. So I can just, you know, literally borrow the first part of that concat right there, paste it in, add a little space there, add an extra paren at the end. So now it's a complete statement. And we just have to choose an alias. And we're going to say as net price, I think is what we called it. All right. This should be it, right? I think I'm just double checking my code for my solution here. Yep, that's it. We, I think, have solved it using this little tidbit here. So let's go ahead and run this query and see if our output matches our example. So I can pull the example back up on the screen here. And are we coming up with the same values? And it looks like, at least for all the numbers that are on screen, once again, that the values are matching, right? All the discounts are working out to exactly the right amount. So there's the solution then for exercise number 3. Everybody all right? Right. Nobody getting a different answer or weird results in any way, shape, or form? Okay. I think that's good, by the way. All right. I'm going to move on to exercise number 4.
Hey, I said the guy split. My girlfriend just called me saying she got in a car accident, so I gotta go see if she's okay.
Okay. Sorry about that.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. Do what you need to do. I'll see if I can edit that out of the video later. That certainly doesn't need to go on the internet. I don't know if I can do that. I'll try. Did I hear him correctly?
Yeah.
I think so, yeah.
What what did you guys hear exactly? Because he
He
said
said
that
he had to go because his girlfriend just got into a car accident.
okay. Okay, that's what I heard. Yeah, that's not good, by the way. Not good at all.
Yeah, I'm praying everything is okay.
Same here. Positive thoughts. Nobody's hurt. Cars and stuff can be replaced. People, not so much.
Could you just talk through for a quick second? I probably a dumb question, but your choice to indent it right away off the select, I just feel like I haven't seen that a lot in my limited reading of MySQL code and SQL code in general. Like usually it's like it's very
Yeah,
rare to see like a floating select or floating anything really like that on its own. But is that just like a personal preference type of thing, or is it like what?
I'll tell you what, this is kind of that's actually a great question from the standpoint of like when we're like formatting this stuff. The one thing we always have to remember is the MySQL engine, when it executes the queries, doesn't care about like this white space here, right? It doesn't, right? So in other words, I could put this like basically all on one line of text if I wanted. Um, the reason that I do this is because first I knew that the commands would like this is the shortest command, right? But even if I did, let's say like 10 commands, even if I was just doing a straight up query, Chris, right? If I was just running like just choosing columns and I was choosing 10 columns out of 50 or something, if there's a number of them, when you start having a number of them, this just makes it easier to look at all the separate statements to me, right? Um, okay, is there a magic number after which I'm like, yeah, I better go to the indent approach? And I'm going to say, no, there's not. Like, if it was a bunch of really short statements, I'd probably put them all on one line. That's kind of my convention, right? When I know the statements are going to get long and I'm trying to show them on a screen to record, so there's a couple strategies here, right, at play. I'm doing it like this because that way you can look at them all at the same time. And you know what? Because like the third and the fourth one are kind of feeding each other, right, in a sense, or one leads to the other. It's really helpful to just have it sitting there, like easier to read. You have to agree that it is easier to see this way, you know. Now you notice with the from command, now I could do it like this, right? As I just set it up. But the from command is always like you're usually only pulling from one table unless you're doing joins, right? Or subqueries, right? And in that case, I would probably also indent and follow through. In this case, I don't think it's necessary for that portion of it. Hopefully that helps. Yeah. And you know what? It's kind of goofy. That's like you feel like, should I ask the question? Oh yeah, you absolutely should ask the question because that's why we're here in classes to figure this stuff out. And let's be frank about it, right? The book doesn't necessarily say, well, we do it like this because if they do it so quickly, like at the beginning of the book, and then you never, how often do you go back to the beginning of the book and reread that information? The answer is never, basically. All right, so here's our next exercise, which is it says using the date format, date add, and date diff functions, write a query that displays all orders with a valid ship date. Display the following: order ID, order date, approximate ship date, actual ship date, and the number of days it took to ship. Okay, let's look at the example once again, because I think looking at the example output is kind of helps you kind of determine pretty quickly what you're shooting for. Where's this information going to come from, you think, right? Given the tables that we have, most likely from the orders table. Let's take a look once again at the orders table. So just to familiarize ourselves with the fields. So order ID, customer ID, order date, ship amount, tax amount, ship date, ship address ID, whatever that means, card type, card number, card expires, billing address ID. Okay. So we're supposed to determine here, right, the order date, right? So that's one date. The ship date, well, those are all givens, right? So order ID, order date, ship date, those are given pieces of information. The only difference really is how we're outputting the column names. All right. Days to ship, apparently, is that a calculation. Well, it is, right? But can we do that calculation like we do other ones? No, we're going to run a function that will do this calculation for us. And that's the date difference function, by the way. The other columns really are a matter of like, if I'm going from this order date to this order date, what am I really doing? I'm just getting rid of the time, right? So I'm just formatting the date. Same with the ship date. If you look at it, that one, I'm doing the same exact maneuver. So these two columns will basically be the same command. Order ID, we're just putting it on screen, whatever, right? So these three columns are easy. So why do I point this out, right? Like when I look at like a coding thing, I always go to like, okay, what's the easiest thing to fix? All right, I can output that, no problem. I can probably do this one. I think we did that before. So I can look at an example, no problem, no problem. And then these other two are the more complicated ones that we'll spend a little bit more time on. So I'm going to approach the code exactly in that fashion. I'm just going to write the simplest stuff first and then pepper in the other stuff. So let's get the simple stuff to work, and then we'll take the more difficult stuff one at a time, right? This is a really good strategy, though. And the reason I kind of pointed out, right? Once again, many of you guys are in my Python class. Same thing when you do programming, same exact approach. And then what I always compare it to a lot as well is when you see like somebody who plays music, for example, and I'm using this example because I went to a number of concerts over the weekend, but you see somebody playing music and you see them play a lot of notes and you're like, how did you learn all those notes and remember them, right? You're not even like looking at sheet music and you're playing all these complicated notes. And the musicians will say, one note at a time, one phrase at a time, and they think of it in chunks, right? And then they also recognize that certain chunks repeat. Some are really, really simple. And then there's usually only a couple little sections that'll be difficult. And so they learn all the easy stuff first, then they work on the difficult parts and stitch it all together, and then they have a complete thing, right? So that the problem solving approach is really, I think, pretty helpful. All right, so let's start to code the easy parts. All right, so we'll do a select statement again. I'm going to use the indent approach because once again, I have 4 columns I'm doing. And well, order ID, piece of cake. I'm just going to call it order ID, done. Right. And that one doesn't even need the name changed. I mean, if you want, all right, you could do order ID as, order ID if you want to make it, I guess, fancy. That's as far as I'll go with fancy on that. Then we have the 2 columns, order date, ship date, right? So we're going to be putting that on the screen. We also need to make it look nice. So the basic part of it is order date, and that should be an underscore, by the way, order date, and then we'll output it as order date, just look a little nicer. And so you notice how I'm just like typing these in first, and then I'll do all the formatting stuff after. This is kind of how my brain functions. Your brain might not work this way. You might go right to the full explained solution. But I'm going to tell you what, that's not how I learned how to like be effective at coding. I always like, okay, what's the simplest thing I can do? All right, that's good. I'll at least get that on the screen. Now I'll tweak it. Right. So now I can go ahead, and you know what? Even as this sits, right, I could just do from the orders table, and I could just run this, and I can just see that I'm getting an output. I will have you note, there are some null entries, so we got to contend with that issue, right? If something doesn't have a ship date, what does that mean? Probably it's not in stock, or they haven't shipped it yet. It's one or the other, right? So that's kind of good information to know anyhow, even if this isn't in the final format. The dates are not in the right look yet, and that's going to come next. So that's what we're working on now. So we can use this function called date underscore format, opening and closing parentheses around order date. Okay. All right. But I want you to notice here it says write a query that displays all orders with a valid ship date. Display the following order ID, order date, approximate ship date. So why would you approximate that? This is kind of weird. Why would you approximate? Well, how about when you go to like a website and you order something, it's like, what's some of you guys shipping? You know, and some websites will tell you this will ship on Monday. Expect it by Wednesday, right? That's kind of the thinking here. And so if I want to format this, how would I even do like a date format on this? Well, the bottom line is what I would do is here I would just put in the formatting command, and there is kind of an approach to it. And without getting super deep into talking about it, basically we're going to go year, month, day, because that's how it is on the thing. But we're going to use the percent sign in there. Excuse me, gotta type the right key. And we want the full year. So the capital Y is the 4-digit year, right? And then if I do a lowercase m, percent m, that's a numeric month. And percent lowercase d, which is numeric day, right? And so we're going to 4-digit year dash 2-digit month, only if it's a 2-digit month, right? And the day in whatever size it is. And I want you to look at like the example output here, right? When you look at the output, this is what we're targeting to shoot for. All right, let's close this out. I forgot my single quote there. Let's run this as is and see if it does what I'm expecting. You know, once again, one step at a time. You guys feeling where I'm going with that? One step at a time. Okay, I got one column looking good. Well, if I use that technique on this column, I'm going to guess I can use the same technique on the other column. So I'm going to copy the date format function down here. I'm also going to copy the parameters here, and that's going to go right there. And now I'm going to run the query again. Let's see if I got it to work. So here we are with those dates. All right. So we got the order date and the ship date. No problem. All right. Got some problems here though. And I don't know if you guys are picking up on the problem. So we're going to have to deal with these. Now I have to come up with this other column called approximate ship date. And can we look at the chart and make a determination as to what's actually happening here? Order dates on the 28th. We ship on the 30th, 28th, 30th, 29th, 31st, 30th. Can't really read that one. I'm assuming that says the first. 31st is the second. And then the first is the third. So what I'm counting that as is once you order, in 2 days, we'll ship it. Right? That's how I'm counting that. This seems to be calculated. The approximate ship date is calculated. And there are functions that allow us to do that calculation, by the way. And one of them is called date add. Now that column appears between these two. So I'm going to put that right in this spot, and I'm going to go right to that function, date add. And what am I adding? I'm going to take the order date, right? And I want to add to it 2 days. So if I could say plus 2 days, you know, and call it a day, but that's not how this works. They have a command inside of this function, right? And you'd have to read up on it to get this, called interval to day, right? And this is the syntax. I didn't come up with it, so don't shoot me, right? Somebody else came up with this idea. And then whatever we do with this, we're going to also alias it as approx ship date. That's how the output on that one looks. However, we do want to format this so it looks like the other dates that we're doing, right? So now, once again, we're going to take the date format function. We're going to append it to the start of the statement. And then we're going to take the parameters, right? Comma, space, year, month, day, same format. And we're going to add it right here after that parenthesis, like so. So this is reading the order date, adding 2 days to it. Then we're taking the result of all of that, formatting it as year, month, day with the date format function. And we're putting it on screen as a proximate ship date. Once again, I'm going to run the query as is to see if it's working. All right. So far, so good, right? So what happens on these ship dates? Why aren't these shipped yet? Maybe it's still April 2nd, you know, or maybe it's still April 3rd and it hasn't shipped yet. You know, that could be the why, right? We don't know that. Right. The example that we're looking at, by the way, notice how it ends like right here. Why is it not including the nulls? Well, we can write code around that, right? All right. I'm not really concerned about that piece of it. The other piece that we have to add to this is the days to ship, right? So how long is it actually taking to get shipped is really kind of the point here. And so that's another calculated field. And they have a special function for that called date difference. And so I'm going to add that as the last column here. And I'm just going to go right to that function. It's date diff. You see it right there at the bottom. That's the basic function. And what do we want the difference of? Well, we want the difference between the ship date and the order date. Since the ship date, and I want you to think about this carefully here, comes after the order date, that will be greater numerically than the order date. Therefore, we'll want to list it first. So we're going to list ship date first, because then it's going to subtract the order date and then give us a positive number. That's what this will do. And then we want to alias this as days to ship. Okay. All right. Let's run this, make sure it's okay. And it looks like it's working, right? So this one, right? Order date. We have an approximate ship date. It was supposed to ship on the 1st, but it didn't really ship until the 3rd. So it was 4 days to ship. How on earth do I get rid of the null values? All right. Well, this is where we run a where statement, right? So if I want to get rid of these, what am I looking to be true? Wherever the ship date is null, it's a problem. So I'm going to say where ship date is not null. Right. So if I run the query again, these 3 entries will drop off. Because so ultimately what this is trying to figure out is, hey, when an order comes in, how many days is it taking to ship? Right? The ones that haven't shipped, well, we don't care about those because we don't know, right? So let's run the query with that piece of information. And now we have a table that looks just like our example. Notice, right? Identical output here. And I'll move that down out of the way so you can see all the completed SQL code. Now we have under 5 minutes left here. So I want to do the last exercise, and I'm going to keep rolling until we're done with it. If you guys need to go because you have to go to another class or you have other things happening, like car accidents and stuff, you should go deal with that. Otherwise, Python people, welcome to class. We're still finishing up our MySQL class here, by the way. All right, so we're moving on to exercise number 5, folks. And let me copy that over from the document. This is the one where we're doing the regex stuff, by the way. I'm just going to paste it in here and then make this all a comment. So it says in exercise number 2, you use the locate and substring functions to extract the domain name from the email address of the customers. Now you'll do something similar with the administrators table. However, you'll use the regular expression substring and the regular expression in instra thing, I don't know how you say that, to display the email address, username, and domain name, and basically to output it as shown here. So in other words, we'll pull the email address, we'll pull the username and the domain name and separate them, right? So we've got a little bit of experience with this, but we use a different approach. So now we're going to use the regex expressions, and I'm trying to be mindful that we're essentially out of time here too. So I'm going to try to do this somewhat rapidly, right? Especially for those that want the answer before they leave. All right, so let's start once again with a select statement. And the first column is going to be a really easy one, right? So let's just kind of do that right away. The first one is we're pulling the email address in, and we're going to output it as email address. So it's getting an alias. What table is this coming from? This is a different table this time. It's coming from the administrators table. All right. Can we just run this to make sure it's like hitting the table? All right. So it's pulling the 3 admins in. All right. Now let's go ahead and start adding to the expression here. And we do have a series of regular expressions that we're doing here. And I don't want to get super verbose about explaining how they work, because frankly, we just don't have the time. But the short of it is basically this: a regular expression allows you to set up a pattern that indicates how the data should be formatted and acceptable to receive, right? And once again, I don't have enough time to explain what the nuances of all the characters are, but you can certainly look it up. And if you do any other traditional programming, chances are you've seen this stuff before. All right, so this time we're going to put in this function to pull in just the username portion of the email address. And so what they use is what they call the reg expression underscore substring. So it kind of pulls a substring, but it does so as a regular expression. Where is it pulling it from? The email address, right, of the administrators table. There's a pattern that we use in regex. I'm using empty quotes for right now, just to remember to close the parenthesis. But basically, we're going to use the caret symbol, right? Then we use square brackets, and inside the square brackets, we're going to say A to Z. So any letters are fine. So it's, and what this character basically means is it begins with letters, right? And then we throw in this character, which basically I think says as many as are necessary, is what that one says. So begins with and as many as are necessary. And you guys can look that up. And I'm sure I'm probably waffling on it a little bit, but that's how I remember it from studying it all these years. All right. And then we're going to alias this as username on the screen. So we're just extracting the username from the email address. Let's try it. Right. So here comes the run. And there you go. So we're just pulling the first part of it. So basically what's happening here is this is, I want the beginning part of the string, as long as it's letters, however many there happen to be. But the moment I hit a non-letter or a special character or punctuation or a space, it stops grabbing the text, right? And so it just grabs up to the @ sign and then gives me the username. Pretty clever, right? All right, let's do this. The last part. So we're going to run the same function, basically, which is a regular expression substring and a set of parentheses. Ultimately, whatever we do inside those, we're going to alias this as the domain name. Now we could, right, use the same approach we used before, like in the other exercise, but in this case, we want to use regex again to do this. We're going to start by doing looking basically at the email address column. And now we just need a different regular expression, once again, inside single quotes here. And this time, right, we're not looking for it to begin with, right? We are looking for the domain name. And this is where the syntax is really weird. So we're not using the caret symbol because that's like a begins with thing, but we are looking for A to Z and some letters and then a period, right? So think about that. After the @ sign, there's some letters followed by a period, right? So that's the pattern. And then after the period, right? Usually domain names are 3 letters, but sometimes they're 2, and sometimes actually they're more. So we use an asterisk because it could be as long as whatever after the period. And then the $, which implies the wild card. So it could be anything basically after that point. All right, so let's see if this works, right? Will that pull the right information? And I know that it's, well, yeah, it does. Okay, so it does pull our domain name in. And I think this is really clever because this is super, super simple. What you might also want to do, and we have this command here, right? And I want to just kind of point that one out, right? That one's used to basically insert a value, or okay, so basically, and I'm not even saying it right, not insert a value, but find the value inside the string that we're going to be basically ignoring. What I am noticing though, and the reason I'm bringing this up is that this command alone that we've already used so far, it works. We don't need this extra command, but I do want to show you that the command can be added, so, and it still gives you the same output. So once again, I'm going to do regular expression underscore instr, so in string, and we are going to feed in the email address, right? And we're looking for the @ symbol, and we're just looking to see if it's in the string. I do have to close that second parentheses. So in other words, if I had an email address that did not include an @ sign, meaning it's not a real email address, it would exclude it. See the cleverness of that, right? That's kind of the point of it. So I'm going to run the command again. You'll see the output is identical, but if I had an entry in the database that omitted that piece of information, it would detect it and not include it, which is cool. All right, folks, that is the solution here for all of the exercises for this week. So I'm going to stop the recording here.